like I'm supposed to pick a side for a while. With the coronavirus stuff, you look on Facebook, you look on social media, and it looks like the battle lines have been drawn, right? Either this is some kind of government conspiracy and all of this is stupid and they're attacking our liberties, or the other side, this is the end of the world and we all have to be overly concerned, and it seems like there's nowhere in between, right? We got to pick a side. And just when we thought tensions were high with that, then we saw the death of George Floyd, with a police officer putting his knee on the back of his neck and killing him unjustly. And for once, I thought we were all on the same side. That was wrong. That shouldn't have happened. And then protesting began. And then rioting began. And then looting began. And all of a sudden, it's pick sides again, right? Everybody's got to pick a side now. And I got to tell you, I've tried to stay off social media. I find myself becoming enraged at all sides. I'm getting angry at everybody, and I don't want to be like that. So I just need to quit reading for a while, and I have. But you know, I've been feeling like this and feeling like there's so much tension, there's so much animosity, but I've actually felt like that for a while, haven't you guys? I felt like that there has been lines drawn in about every way possible for a while now. Whether it be race, black versus white, or when Trump was running for his first term, you know, people were up in arms on whether we should build a wall or not. So there was racial tension. For sure, political parties, right? When's the last time a Republican and a Democrat have been able to have a conversation without it ending with people angry? I don't remember it. Social economic class, everybody's got their own idea of what's going to help our country, how we can fix things. And I find myself over these past years going, man, I feel like we're at a point in history that the world's never seen before. And as I was getting ready for the lesson tonight, I thought, you know, that's just not true. We tend to think that the world is different today than it's always been. And I was reminded of the relationship between the Jews and the Samaritans, and how for hundreds of years they had major issues with each other that they couldn't get straightened out, that they warred over, that they argued over, that they fought over. And I thought, you know, that's not that different. We're not that different. There's always been battle lines being drawn, and people thinking they're right, and people thinking everyone else is wrong, and getting angry when people don't agree with them. And I think maybe looking at this relationship and looking at Jesus' approach to these two sides might help us in today's time as well. So let's dig into that. I want us to turn over to 2 Kings chapter 17. And I think this will help us kind of understand the contention, at least where I think it really escalated between the Jews and the Samaritans. Well, here you've got the two kingdoms. As you remember, Israel was one nation for a while. That was until Solomon's sons took over, Jeroboam and Rehoboam, and basically the nation split in half, half following Rehoboam, half following Jeroboam, and they stayed split from then on. Israel really had a rough history from that point on. I think all bad kings from that point on. I can't remember a good one. There may have been one in there, but not coming to mind. Judah did better. They had some good kings and some bad kings. But this is where it started. They split up, and there was some contention there from the very split. But I think things really heated up in 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 21. What happens here is Israel has now been taken into captivity. And the Assyrians have allowed the Israelites, or they've allowed some people to move back in where the Israelites used to live. Okay? By the way, the northern kingdom, that's where Samaria is at. And it's going to become this bigger district during Jesus' time. It was really kind of the capital city for the northern kingdom, Israel. We'll have a picture of it a little later on of what it'll look like during Jesus' time. But in 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 21, it says, when he had torn Israel from the house of David, they made Jeroboam the son of Nebat king. This is talking all the way back to Jeroboam and Rehoboam. And Jeroboam drove Israel from following the Lord and made them commit great sin. And the people of Israel walked in all the sins that Jeroboam did. They did not depart from them until the Lord removed Israel out of his sight, as he had spoken by all his servants, by the prophets. So Israel was exiled from their own land to Assyria until this day. So because of their wickedness, God allows them to be taken over by the Assyrian, to be taken out of their homeland. And now the king of Assyria is going to allow new people to live there. And the king of Assyria brought people from Babylon, Cutha, Ava, Hamath, Saravaim, and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the people of Israel. And they took possession of Samaria and lived in its cities. So now there's a new people living there who don't have any Jewish lineage. In fact, they're really pagans, and we're going to see that they do some very wicked stuff. Some people believe, based on the way Assyria dealt with everybody else, that they may have still left some of the Jews there, and that they probably married and had children. So it's possible that at the time of Jesus, the Samaritans did have some bloodline from Hebrew bloodline. But it's also possible that there weren't any Jews left there, and that now the people who live in Samaria really have nothing genetically in common with the Jews. Okay, so I'm not sure on that. Possibly in the time of Jesus, the Samaritans have some Jewish lineage, but for sure, they're mostly these Gentile pagan cities, people who have moved in. Okay, verse 25. And at the beginning of their dwelling there, they did not fear the Lord. Therefore the Lord sent lions among them, which killed some of them. So they move in, and they're doing all these pagan practices, and they're not being obedient to God. And lions come and start eating these people. So that news gets back to the king of Assyria, and here's his solution, verse 26. So the king of Assyria was told, the nations that you have carried away and placed in the cities of Samaria do not know the law of the God of the land. Therefore he has sent lions among them, and behold, they are killing them, because they do not know the law of the God of the land. Then the king of Assyria commanded, send there one of the priests whom you carried away from there, and let him go and dwell there, and teach them the law of God, the God of the land. So the priests whom they carried away from Samaria came and lived in Bethel, and taught them how they should fear the Lord. So they send a priest back. We need these lions to quit eating everybody. Obviously, we have angered a god, in their mind, a god. So they send someone that used to live in the land, who would know the God of that land, a priest, to teach them how to worship the God of this land. And so he teaches them. Verse 31. Hey, there we go. Actually, verse 41 is where we need to be. So these nations feared the Lord, and also served their carved images. Their children did likewise, and their children's children, as their fathers did, so they do to this day. So they learned about God and what it took to serve him, but they didn't fully commit to him. They served many gods, and they had idols, and they worshiped those as well. I believe it's in verse 31, it even talked about to some of their false gods, they even sacrificed their children. And so, though they started to understand who God was and the law and how to serve him, they definitely weren't fully committed to that. They're serving lots of gods, and this is going to cause a problem with the people of Judah. Now keep in mind, Judah it took a lot longer, not a lot longer, some longer, but they were actually taken captive as well. Through a series of events, God eventually lets them go back to Jerusalem to rebuild the city, to rebuild the temple. That's where I want to look at next. Ezra chapter 4. So now the people of Judah have already been taken captive, allowed to come back. They're rebuilding the city, and they're going to have an interaction with the people of Samaria. Ezra chapter 4, verse 1. Now when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the returned exiles were building a temple to the Lord, the God of Israel, they approached Zerubbabel and the heads of the fathers' houses and said to them, "Let us build with you, for we worship your God as you do, and we have been sacrificing to him ever since the days of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us here." But Zerubbabel, Jeshua, and the rest of the heads of the fathers of the houses in Israel said to them, "You have nothing to do with us in building a house to our God, but we alone will build to the Lord, the God of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, has commanded us." Then the people of the land discouraged the people of Judah and made them afraid to build, and bribed counselors against them to frustrate their purpose all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, even until the reign of Darius, king of Persia. So Judah comes back, and they are rebuilding the temple. And the Samaritans come up and say, "Hey, we've done some worship to your God. Let us help you build this." Which seems like a nice offer, right? But they say, "No, you've got no part in this because you're a wicked people," is what it seems like they're saying. "We know the things that you've done. We know the gods that you've worshiped. Don't put your filthy hands on this holy temple." That's what it sounds like. And the Samaritans were mad. They went from wanting to help build the temple to they will do anything to destroy it and destroy those who are working on it. They start bribing people, and they start talking to other nations. And it gets pretty scary for the people of Judah who are trying to rebuild this. It looked like they were going to have to go to war. God sticks with them. He allows them to finish the job. They get the temple built. But it seems like from that point on that everything's been escalated. We're talking 500 years, really over 500 years before the time of Christ. And as we read through the New Testament, we see that tensions are still high, right? 500 years later. They still didn't have it worked out. They still hate each other. Well, like I said, this continues on for a long, long time until we come to Jesus. In John chapter 8, I want to show you just how the environment was, the mood was when Jesus is on the scene. Things hadn't changed. In John chapter 8, Jesus was talking to some of the Jews, and he was trying to convince them that he was the Son of God, and that there was salvation in him, and some of them even believed him. That was until he said that they needed to follow his word, change their lives, and then they didn't like that. So they get angry, and if you read through John chapter 8, you'll see they're kind of getting into it. They went from believing Jesus to being angry at him. And in John chapter 8, verse 48, it seems like they throw an insult at him that's the worst thing that they can think of, right? They've had enough of Jesus, and they said, "Are we not right in saying that you are a Samaritan and that you have a demon?" And I don't know which one of those they think is worse. They are trying to come after Jesus, and they think this is just going to cut him to the core. This is the worst thing we can think of, and that's what we're going to call him. That's what the mood is. 500 years later, and it's still going on, and there's still hate, and there's still no one crossing any lines to fix things. John chapter 4. Of course, this is when Jesus is going to go through Samaria himself. He's in Galilee, and he wants to get to Jerusalem, Judea. As you can see in the map there, if you're in Galilee, the quickest way to get to Judea is straight through Samaria. Now, well, let's read this verse and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. John chapter 4, verse 3. He left Judea and departed again for Galilee. Sorry, he's in Judea going to Galilee. And he had to pass through Samaria. So he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Now, the text, John says he had to pass through Samaria. Most people don't think that's true. Now, I've taught this and I've heard other people teach this, that we're for sure that people went around, the Jews went around Samaria going from Galilee and Judea. And as I studied that out a little farther, I couldn't find anything in Jewish literature or anything like that. But it is assumed very heavily that that was the case, that at least a lot of people did this. Because the Jews did feel like when you go through Samaria that you would be unclean just from being in their presence, just from being around these people. We do know that they didn't want to be in the house of anyone that they considered to be a Gentile, someone who was not a Hebrew, and they didn't consider these people to. So I think it is very likely that what preachers and myself have taught a lot of times is that many of the Jews, when they're making this trip from Galilee to Judea, would go through Perea, adding like 15 miles to their journey just so they didn't have to step foot into Samaria. Now, whether that's the case or not, we do know that any of them that did go through Samaria had no dealings with the Samaritans. You don't waste your time in Samaria, and you sure don't talk to them. You sure don't befriend them. Verse 9, if you know the story, we know that Jesus starts talking to a Samaritan woman he meets at the well. And she's shocked, right? Again, we kind of see what the environment is, what the climate is. She says, You're talking to me? But the Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. I mean, her jaw hits the ground. I can't believe this guy has even said something to me, much less being kind. So even when the Jews, even if they did, any of them try to save some time by not going around, when they went through, the Samaritans knew they're not talking to us, they're not dealing with us, we're going to ignore each other the best that we can and try to keep a fight from starting. Because usually, if they talk to each other, a fight's going to start. Sound like some stuff we've been living in, right? Any way you want to draw the line. Any two people that disagree, pick a side and then stay away from each other or there's going to be a fight. And that's where we've been living. Really, that's where the creation has been living ever since the fall, right? We're such a flawed people. And yet, John said that Jesus had to pass through Samaria. Why did Jesus have to pass through Samaria? I don't think he had to, not in the way that we think about it. He could have went around Samaria. I know he didn't have to talk to the woman at the well. He could have done what everybody else did, what every other Jew did, and just ignore her. Or maybe even start a fight. But it wasn't just one way. It wasn't that only the Jews hated the Samaritans hated the Jews as well. This was a mutual thing. I want to look at one more section before we make some points here to make sure that we understand just how volatile this situation was. Another time that Jesus was in Samaria, the Samaritans weren't kind to him, weren't kind to his followers. So this goes back and forth. The Jews aren't kind to the Samaritans aren't kind to the Jews. Look at Luke chapter 9, verse 51. When the days drew near for him to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem, and he sent messengers ahead of him who went and entered a village of the Samaritans to make preparations for him. But the people did not receive him because his face was set toward Jerusalem. So because they can tell that he's traveling to Jerusalem, he's facing Jerusalem, we're not having anything to do with that guy because he's on the wrong side. Right? And this is Jesus. Who doesn't want to be on the side of Jesus? Jesus has never treated anybody badly. But they say, we don't have anything to do with him or any of the people with you because we know you're going to Jerusalem. You're on the wrong side. And watch how that is reacted to by the disciples. Keep in mind, the ones who are going to say this is James and John. John, the disciple of love. Watch their reaction. When the disciples, James and John, saw it, they said, Lord, do you want us to tell fire to come down from heaven and consume them? We'll burn them. We'll burn this city down. Sad, isn't it? Of course, what's Jesus' reaction? He turned and rebuked them, and they went on to another village. You can just see Jesus going, what are you guys doing? How long have you been with me? Aren't you supposed to be learning? Aren't you supposed to be seeing what I'm doing? We don't react to people badly when they react badly to us. We don't say that we're going to kill them. We don't say that we're going to burn them. And this is James and John leading the march. They're ready to start the fight. Why did Jesus have to go through Samaria? Why would he go to a place that he knows there's anger? Why would he go to a place where he knows people are not going to accept him? I think the answer comes from another section of Scripture, Matthew chapter 4, verse 1. At the beginning of Jesus' ministry, it says, then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And I've always thought that verse was kind of hard to understand. Why would the Spirit lead Jesus to be tempted? Why would the Spirit lead Jesus and put him in difficult situations? But that's what God, through the Holy Spirit, wanted him to do. That's where he wanted him to be. And I believe that's why Jesus had to go through Samaria, because that's what God wanted. And the Spirit was leading him to be there because people needed him there. Because people needed to see love. People needed to see kindness between two people that hadn't seen it for over 500 years. I believe that the Spirit led him through Samaria, and that's why Jesus had to go that way. Jesus allowed the Spirit to lead him to places that no one else wanted to go. The Jews didn't want to go through Samaria. They didn't want to be around those people. Jesus said, God, if that's your will, I'm willing to go there, even if they treat me badly. He allowed the Spirit to lead him to interact with people that no one else would. He allowed the Spirit to lead him to help those who all others had forgotten. And he allowed the Spirit to lead him to teach people who others hated. Where are we being led by the Spirit? Are we quenching the Spirit because we don't care enough about the other side? I don't care what side it is. I don't care if it's Republican, Democrat. I don't care if it's black, white. I don't care if it's rich, poor, male, female. Draw the line wherever you want. Are we quenching the Spirit because we don't want to do good for the other side? Because we don't want to do God's work? Where will it lead you? Galatians chapter 5 has the answers for us. If we are being Spirit-led, and as Christians we definitely should be, this is where we should be going. Galatians 5, verses 16 through 25 talks about the works of the flesh and being led by the flesh versus the fruit of the Spirit and being led by the Spirit. Let's start in verse 16. But I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the desires of the flesh are against the Spirit, and the desires of the Spirit are against the flesh. For these are opposed to each other to keep you from doing the things you want to do. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. Now the works of the flesh are evident: sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. I warn you, as I warned you before, that those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. Where will the Spirit lead us? Well, it's going to lead us away from our fleshly desires. I can guarantee you it's not going to lead us to react to that temptation to put something hateful on Facebook. That's not where the Spirit leads. It's not going to lead us to anything that causes division and dissensions. That's not being led by the Spirit, that's being led by the flesh. If we are led by the Spirit, as I believe Jesus was, we are going to be getting away from the things of the flesh. Continuing on in Galatians 5, it says in verse 22, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. And those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and its desires. If we're being led by the Spirit, we're going to become more like Jesus. And when people treat us badly, we're going to treat them with love and kindness and goodness and patience. The Spirit will lead us to become more like God. In verse 25, if we live by the Spirit, let us also keep in step with the Spirit. What that means is, if you're going to live by the Spirit, then you need to keep up with the Spirit. Because the Spirit's going to push you to be uncomfortable. I don't know how many of you have ever ran. But if you want to get better, you got to get uncomfortable, right? To get away from being led by the flesh and becoming more like God, the Spirit is going to take you to places that make you uncomfortable. When we get into the Word and we allow the Spirit to guide us, God's Spirit, it should change us. It should make us better, and we got to keep up. Because I don't think that any of us have arrived to where our ultimate goal is yet. We've all got work to do. Y'all, I don't know what all the answers are right now. As I got this lesson ready, I wanted to be able to give us something that says, here's how we fix the world. And I don't have it. If the Jews and the Samaritans can fight for over 500 years, I think people can fight with anybody over anything for a long time. But I know this. It's never the wrong answer to act with the love of Christ. It's never the wrong answer to go and reach out and try. Jesus had a lot of success in Samaria with the Samaritan woman and the people there on that occasion. Other times he was in Samaria, he was rejected. But we have to go and we have to love if we're going to be Spirit-led like Jesus. I hope this is something that's been encouraging to you. Hopefully this will spur us on to become more like Christ, and maybe we can be a light in a dark world. If you have any needs, whether you need the prayers of the church or you're ready to put Christ on in baptism, we have that opportunity ready for you as we stand and sing.